Hello, and welcome to this new series of videos that I'm going to be doing on FL Studio and how I use it with Artax to record vocals, guitars, drums, bass, and sort of the basics of producing rock and metal within FL Studio, as well as sequencing synthesizers, adding effects, and hopefully some shortcuts and tools and hotkeys that can help you get your ideas down faster. So I've been using FL Studio since about 2008, I think, or 2009, and I really enjoy it because its interface, I've gotten used to it. It's probably more of a thing of habit. It's a bit different from other DAWs in it's more focused around being a sequencer and sequencing MIDI and synthesizers and stuff, but it does handle audio really well. It just looks a bit different from Pro Tools, has a bit of a different workflow and interface. But I've gotten used to it, and I actually use it for rock and metal, which is kind of not what it's most commonly been used for. But more and more, it is being used in the rock and metal world for music production, getting ideas down quickly, sequencing like drum machines and stuff like that. It's got really good tools for those sorts of things, such as its key roll and its a sequencer and stuff like that. But for today, what we'll do is just get a kind of idea of how to get your audio interface ready to work with FL Studio and hopefully get some vocals recorded with a bit of a backing track, just as a sort of introduction to getting vocals into FL Studio, how to get audio into FL Studio in general, whether that's monitoring back live, hearing your effects in the headphones as you're singing, or adding effects later using dry stems from a DI track that you take. We'll cover both. And as you can see already on the screen, I have my effects and my dry channels all set up, but we'll get to that in a minute. Let's kind of break down how we get our audio interface to speak to FL Studio. So I'm using a PreSonus 1824C, and it comes with driver software that I've downloaded and installed already, obviously, and you can get your driver software from the manufacturer website of your sound card. You should install that, restart the PC, and you should be good to go. Now, the software for the driver usually comes with some sort of interface, but within FL Studio, let's allow it to speak to our sound card. So in the options menu, you can go down to audio settings. Within here, there's a drop-down menu for your device. Have a look through the devices, and it should be in the ASIO devices. Mine is a Studio USB ASIO driver, so I select that. I want to then show the ASIO panel, so I click here on this button, and it should open the driver's software interface. It's got some information here in the firmware version, and the sample rate that I'm using, make sure that matches up. I'm using 44.1, so that matches up. And then one of the most important things we're going to be looking at today within this is the block size. The block size is sort of in the simplest terms, is sort of the latency. So the time it takes for me to speak into the microphone and for it to go through all the system and be processed by effects and then come back and hit my headphones. So for tracking live and you want to hear your effects within that you've used within FL Studio, you don't want latency, so you want to try and bring that block size down as low as possible. However, the lower the block size you go, the more intensive it is on your CPU. So if you drop the block size too low with too much going on within your project, you can sometimes get distortion and breakup, and it can sound terrible. But for this PC and the project we have right now, we're only going to be playing back WAVs, and we're going to be adding a couple of VSTs to 1 or 2 channels, so we can go right down to 16, and there's barely noticeable latency latency that I can hear in the headphones, so that's great. So especially if you're tracking, the latency can be real bad. It can be real put off. So lowest block size you can go before it starts to break up. Now, if you're just producing, you're just sitting back and using synths and editing already recorded audio, at this block size it's going to distort, it's going to sound terrible, the project will grind to a halt. So you can whack that right back up to this sort of range of numbers. But for right now, for this example, we're going to have a low block size because we want as low latency as possible. So we can close, well, before we close that actually, we want to look at the software mixer for the sound card. So I click on this and it brings up the mixer. Now you'll notice that I have channel 1 muted, and that's because I don't want to hear audio from this mixer. I want to hear audio from the FL Studio mixer, this one here, and I don't want to hear both at the same time. So I mute the mic 1 channel, and that means that there's not 2 voices, and you get a weird phasing effect, especially with the latency so low, because this mixer is not affected by the what you're hearing is the dry signal coming straight in, and there's no latency there. However, looping through FL Studio, there's going to be latency because you're adding effects and stuff like that. That's the simplest way I can explain it. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. Obviously, I'll happily correct stuff as we go. So we can close this down now because we're not going to come back to that for a while. So within FL Studio, we're going to open our mixer, which is this button here. And I've already set this up, but what you want to do is click on the insert, and you want to then, on this drop-down menu, select the microphone that you're using. So I'm using a microphone that needs phantom power, so I've enabled phantom power on the sound card. If you're not hearing anything, double check that your mic, if it needs phantom power, that's on, and then select your mic here. So I'm put it into input 1. The volume levels are good because for talking volume, we're in a good place. If we sing or go louder, hello, you can see it gets up more into the orange. But for now, we're in a good place. We don't want to have it too quiet. We don't want to have it peaking. The reason I've called this track effect is because this is the one that we're going to be listening to in our headphones, and this is the one that we're going to record as our wet signal. We're going to have our delays and our compressor. It's going to sound pretty, produced. Whereas this one is going to be our dry signal. That's going to be the mic completely dry, what you're hearing me speak right now, basically, so no effects. Now, we've set up the effects one to come in, and if you don't hear yourself by this stage, check this is all the way up, this volume here, and then double check that you're recording post EQ or post effects, whatever you want. I'm using post EQ just in case I use any EQ, and this will mean that you'll hear your effects through FL Studio. So we want to do this also on our dry channel because we want to record both. So we select the input, and what I want to do is basically turn this right down. The reason we're doing that is because we don't want to hear the dry signal and the effects signal in here. We only want to hear the effects signal, so we've got that volume up and we've got the dry signal down to the master. So the next thing to look at is our song. So I've got the backing track here. I've laid it out, and I know the tempo. I know it's 130 BPM, and I can test this by enabling the metronome and playing back a part of the song. That sounds like it's 130 BPM. If you don't know the BPM of your song, you can go online, find the BPM counter on Google, and just smack your space bar along with it, and it should get you within the range of where you need to be. If the song isn't snapped to tempo, that's where FL Studio sort of isn't as intuitive. You can still record vocals and do vocal sessions and audio sessions, of course, that's not snapped to the grid. But if you want to use delays and time effects within FL Studio that are based on the BPM of the song, so that your delays are on time and stuff like that, then we want to basically know that this whole song, start to finish, will be in tempo. So we've got the 130 BPM, and it also helps that if you want to disable tracks, for example, the singer doesn't want the drums, you can just play the backing tracks and have the metronome click. So we're going to test our signals. We want to make sure that within FL Studio we're going to be recording audio only. FL Studio can record like MIDI input, it can record automation and stuff like that. We're not going to be doing that right now. We'll be doing that later on in another video. So check in the recording filter that we've only got audio enabled, We don't want automation and stuff like that. And we'll enable the recording icon there. Whether you have the metronome is up to you. This is a countdown. This enables a countdown before the recording starts. So it goes, and you can see there it started recording after a 4 count, and it recorded 2 tracks. So that's good news. We're in a good place, but we want to make sure that we're getting a signal as well. So let's do that again and speak into the microphone. 1, 2, 3. Perfect. We can see there that we've recorded our audio. So if we turn all these things off, 1, 2, 3, we can play it back. Now, that's great and all, you know, it didn't sound very fantastic in here. It doesn't sound great. Obviously, it's completely dry. But it's good to have, because if we want to, for example, later on in the song, we don't like the wet take that we've done, which has got a delays and effects already on it, and it doesn't work, we can go back to this dry stem and start again. You can start stacking effects again. So we'll look at how we stack effects, and we're going to do that on the effects channel, the one I'm speaking into that you can hear now. We're going to leave this one because we want it to be dry. We're not going to put any effects in this. We're just going to use the slots on the effects track. Now this is where you add your plugins and your effects. The way to manage your plugins is if you hit one of the drop downs and go into more plugins, it brings up the effects plugin, the plugins manager, and you can adjust, add, remove your plugins there. So you can hit find installed plugins and it will start to scan your PC. Add your plugin locations here. So if you've installed them on a separate hard drive and stuff like that, click this, and you can enable rescan previously verified plugins, rescan plugins with errors. This is a great tool for finding and organizing your plugins. So once you've got your favorite plugins basically ready to hand within this drop down menu from using the plugins manager, you can grab the first plugin you want to use on your vocal chain. Now usually there's debates, there's subjectivity here of what you put in what order in a signal chain, but I'm going to base this purely on what I do, which could be completely wrong in some people's eyes, and that's totally fine, because everybody does. I mean, as long as it sounds good, doesn't matter. So what we'll do is go to slot 2. The reason I'm going to slot 2 is because I might want to put something before that. So let's add a compressor to slot 2. So there you go. You can hear the compressor affecting my voice. Simple thing with these CLA compressors and stuff like that. Try and get your vocal range around 0. Don't get it too hot. Don't get it dropped down here. Otherwise, it's not doing its thing. That's a super simplified tip on using the CLA. It is the go-to. It's a really, really good plugin compressor. It's quite old. I think it's like over 15 years old by now. Probably more than that, but it's great. We're going to leave it on the Start Me Up preset because it sounds pretty good already. The presets on this are great. You can just go through them using the arrows here, but we're just going to stick with the Start Me Up default, and we're going to close that down for now. Obviously, you can come back to that by single clicking on it. Take that back. But we're going to add our next effect. However, if we aren't happy with this effect being in this part of the signal chain, we can use the mouse scroll wheel to move it up and down slots. Because this is a serial effect, so like it's one into the other and one affects the next, it's really handy to be able to move this around, because it means that if you accidentally, for example, put something in front of something that's not supposed to be there, you can just switch them around using this, and you don't have to reopen and bring your presets back up again. Really handy tool there. And obviously this down here is also really handy. Just remembered this because we're using the post EQ. You can just do quick notches on the EQ there, take out some of the muddiness down there. I mean, that instantly just pulls out that kind of low end muddiness. Got distracted there. Back to the slots. Just to keep things simple, let's go for a EQ. Now this is the more kind of in-depth EQ. This is the Fruity Parametric EQ2. It's a really good kind of visual representation of the sound. So we can, for example, take things out that are maybe a bit too aggressive there. So take that out. Obviously, I'm not singing, so this is just kind of spitballing ideas at the moment. So we've got the EQ, and it's sounding okay. Let's move on to delays. So Fruity Delay 3 is what I use. There it is. I'll quickly explain this one if you're using it on a vocal. Obviously, your wet and dry output volumes knobs are here, and your signal model is here. I like the ping pong, but that's up to you. With the ping pong delay, I like to pan it so it goes left, right, left, right. Right click on the time to set the time of your delay, and this will be connected to the BPM of your song, so it will be snapped. So that your feedback level knob is basically how long the delay goes on for. So if I do this, it will go on forever, and I pull it right down, and it'll only do 1 or 2 delays. That's a really simple way of sort of explaining that. The stuff down here is cool to mess around with maybe later down the line, but that's your basic kind of controls of your delay. So that's sounding pretty cool. Let's maybe increase the feedback, maybe bring the cut off down, and let's add some reverb. So I like Fruity Reverb 2. We're going to turn off the delay for now. And we're currently on the default preset. Let's have a look what else we got. Cathedral, drum room, large hall, small studio, the venue. That sounds pretty cool. I like that. It goes on for too long, so let's take down the decay. Maybe bring wet down. Now, I like to put the reverb after the delay because it kind of softens off the kind of harshness of the delays. It can sort of smooth things out. So let's add the delays back in. Cool. Maybe bring up the feedback. And then the more we bring the volume up in here, sort of washes together. So there's a sort of basic trancey, reverby delay signal chain for your mic. So let's have a quick listen to what we've got here. Let's mute this channel and play back. 1, 2, 3. So as it says effects, that's the one with the effects. And down here is our dry signal. Now we've turned that channel off from being monitored. We should hear 1, 2, 3, our dry signal. And that essentially becomes our backup. We can always go back to that if we don't like the affected signal, because the affected signal, everything's burnt in, it's permanent. You can't go back and remove stuff. However, with the dry signal, you can start from fresh every time, or try and match it as close to copy and paste your effects from the affected signal over to the dry signal, and then you can tweak, essentially go back in time and re-record the effects on the voice. It's a really good workflow to have because you have that redundancy, you have that backup. Another thing to notice is if you listen to the tempo, 1, 2, 3, that will be in a dotted eighth synced to 130 BPM tempo, because FL Studio will sync that. It's sort of a really lazy way of basically slap a delay on BOF. It's gonna sync up with the song. It's gonna sound great. You don't need to do tap tempos and all that sort of stuff. You just type it in basically. So that's the very, very, very basics of getting audio into FL Studio to record some vocal ideas. So for vocalists, this is a really good place to start. So another couple of tips that I can recommend is on your very first slot. Sometimes it's handy to add a limiter. So let's add a limiter. Obviously, I've muted the effects on this channel using this button here, so then you should be able to hear me again. We'll turn the delays off and just leave on the compressor and the EQ. Now, obviously, we've put this limiter at the very top. So therefore, it is the first thing our voice is going to hit. It's going to hit the limiter. This is not limiting what we're hearing in here because we're hearing the very end of the signal chain. So the CLA comes after the limiter. Now, the reason I put the limiter first in this circumstance is because I want to limit peaks. So I can show you how that works using the ceiling knob. I can bring the ceiling knob down and it will sort of clamp the volume of my voice, as you can hear. And then if I put it back up again, it sort of opens back up. So if I shout, 1, 2, you can see that it is capping the sort of the peaking. So it's a really handy tool on the way in if you don't have a hardware version of a limiter. This software limiter from the FL Studio for eLimiter is really, really, really handy. So I put that at the top because I don't want it to, I want it to be the first thing that the signal hits, and then it obviously then moves on to the compressor and the EQ. So what you're hearing right now is the end of the signal chain. If I want to hear just the limiter on its own, I need to turn everything else off, if that makes sense. So turn everything else back on. What you're hearing is you're hearing everything after this. If you just want to hear the compressor, then mute everything else around it. If you want to hear the compressor after being affected by the limiter, put the limiter back on. Hopefully that makes sense. It's a serial effects bus, so basically everything feeds into the next effect. So everything affects, it's basically from one onwards will affect the next effect in that chain. So if you add the reverb after the delay, the reverb will kind of clamp off the delays. If you add the EQ after the compressor, you're going to be EQing the compressed signal. That's a really confusing way of explaining it, but hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. So another thing people use a lot is vocal tuners, auto-tune, and you can actually monitor auto-tune live as an effect if you use a really low block size. So we use the old school auto-tune plugin here. One thing to note is I'm now hearing a delay, so I'm going to hit the low latency button and that's sorted it out, so I'm now hearing less of a delay. Set your scale, minor E, there you go, and it's tuning your format amount and your amplitude amount and stuff like that. These are and your rate will affect your voice the most, and the retune speed. So mess around with them until you're whether you want to use it as an effect or whether you want to use it as like a polishing tool or whatever you want to use it for. Put that higher up in your chain. You don't really want to compress a signal and chuck it through an auto tuner because it can sometimes introduce artifacts or kind of artifacting, unless you want to go for that sort of sound. But for me, I always put the auto tuner way up if I'm going to be using one at all. Now, if I'm to do backing vocals and I just want to record them, and I want them to sort of be more kind of left and right panned, sort of stereo separation, there's a really, really quick method that I use using the Fruity Stereo Shaper, and literally clicking this button twice, this preset here, this will separate off the signal and make me sound like there's two of me, and that's really, really good for using for backing vocals, because what it does is wraps two voices round the center voice, and if you add some nice reverbs to that, it can sound really lush and kind of big pop produced vocals. It sounds really good. So that's a really quick way of just snapping backing vocals kind of left and right panned, and having your main vocal in the middle, and it sounds like you've got three singers singing harmonies and stuff like that. So that's a really great quick tool there. And finally, for the last thing, if you're a streamer and you want to then do what I'm doing and allow these effects to then get streamed to OBS or something similar like that, you can use this RiaStream plugin that I use, which is free, and you can host your audio, basically send audio down IP straight to OBS as a plugin. So that's how I'm sending audio and also being able to hear it back, show the effects and everything live within FL Studio, rather than recording into OBS and you not being able to kind of show how the effects work in real time. So that's sort of the end of the sort of crash course beginners intro to getting audio into FL Studio. how to do a dry and a wet track record, and how to add effects, plugins, organize your plugins, and basically record vocals to the backing track. So yeah, anything else, leave in the comments if I've got anything wrong, or there's something you want to add, or a workflow improvement. Let us know down in the comments, and thanks for checking these videos out. And let me know if there's any requests that you want for kind of detailed explanations. Thanks again for checking this out. Bye!